Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
My next guest is no stranger to you. If you follow this programme, you will remember him coming on the show last year. We had a huge reaction to it about a year ago, I reckon. And the YouTube video and the podcast shared by thousands and thousands of people. He's known to us as Mr. Ethical. And he is Mr. Ethical, really, when you see what he's been through over the last 10 years or so. A one-time head of debt recovery at a firm called Wayman's. He blew the whistle on serious fraud. It doesn't get any bigger than the fraud committed by HSBC, the bank, £1 billion worth of fraud. Through a company that they acquired called HFC, they began adding illegal charges to the debts of store card holders. My next guest told the bank what they were doing was highly illegal. And to say that that was the beginning of what would become an arduous and incredible journey, at times a nightmare for him, I suppose to say that would be an understatement. His website is nicholaswilson.com. As I said, we know him as Mr. Ethical. This is so relevant today. You can't find words to describe how relevant it is. Let's welcome back to the programme Nicholas Wilson, who sorted out his electronic problems and he's live right now. Nicholas, welcome back.
Hi, Richie. Hi.
Thanks for coming on, my friend. I didn't realise since we last spoke the sometimes hilarious efforts, but brilliant, but also kind of poignant efforts that you've been making to get mainstream media to pay attention to your story. And I understand you've even rung in programmes, you know, as a listener, as you're entitled to do, as anybody else is, as an active listener, to talk to them about what happened and what HSBC did and are doing. And as soon as they realise it's you, they just hang up. Is that right?
No, I mean, that was talk radio. They invited me on. They sent me a direct message on Twitter. Their producer said, can you come on? And
I thought you'd, so the plot thickens. No, I thought you'd rung in, so they invited you on.
I don't do that. My pinned tweet on Twitter says, I've given up chasing mainstream media. You lose the will to live.
Yeah.
I don't chase the media anymore. And they chased me. They asked me if I would come on. And I said, as I always do, well, you need to understand, I will talk about Cameron and his involvement with HSBC fraud. And they said, that's fine. Maybe a later show than the one we had in mind. That's fine. We'll call you. And they called me and they put me through and I started telling my bit and they immediately cut me off.
And that's what I heard. I thought you were being a bit devilish, which is what I would do. And I really admired it. I thought Nicholas is brilliant. He's ringing these people up. No. But they asked you to come on.
Yeah, they asked, and it's on my website. The recording and the screenshots of their messages to me on Twitter are on my website.
The behaviour of the mainstream media is, well, it's beyond, it's beneath our contempt. I want to just mention, because we have to tell this from the beginning for our listeners. This is one of the most serious stories I've ever covered. I mean that in all my time in the media. I've been at it coming up on 20 years. Nicholas, as I said, his firm acted for John Lewis Partnership. They collected their debts. And Nicholas has demonstrated to me in the past and others that Wayman's was ethical. They behaved properly and they treated those who owed John Lewis money properly.
John Lewis, not Wayman's.
Excuse me, John Lewis, that's right. You acted for John Lewis and they treated those who owed them money properly and ethically, and they were all above board. Tell us about then. Go back to the beginning of this for our listeners. I'll shut up and let you tell the story about HSBC, how you discovered what was going on, how they acquired HFC Bank and all the problems with that bank in America. Tell us all that, Nicholas. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, John Lewis did treat people well because they instructed me to do the debt recovery, and I treated people well. I mean, I took my instructions from John Lewis, and I'd phone up and say, Mr. Jones has got this problem, he's been made unemployed, and they said, we'll accept £10 a month, and they were very reasonable. But they sold their store accounts to HFC Bank in 2003, and at that time, HFC Bank was being taken over by HSBC Bank. And the first thing HSBC did was set up a company called John Lewis Financial Services Limited to deal with John Lewis store cards. And the first thing they started doing was adding illegal charges to debts when they were passed to solicitors. And there's been things about Wonga and various other payday lenders adding charges and things, £50 and stuff. In this case, it was up to £5,000.
Why was it illegal, Nicholas?
Well, for two reasons. What happened was the solicitors would download the data from the bank overnight. So say Richie Allen had a debt of £10,000. The solicitor's software would automatically add 16.4% to that.
Jesus.
And then the next day, a letter would be generated by computer and sent to Richie Allen saying, you now owe £11,640. So before the solicitors had done any work at all, they'd added £1,640 to the debt.
So that wasn't a punitive added on fee, because sometimes, I mean, Caroline and myself, we don't do what the gas and electric want us to do, which is set up a direct debit. We piss them off. We pay with our card whenever we feel like it. But they always levy on a couple of pound, over, because we've gone over the time. Late payment charge. This wasn't late payment charges.
If you have and bear in mind, it wasn't just John Lewis. HFC did the store accounts for Dixon's, Curry's, PC World, Furniture Village, B&Q, Halfords, Courts, Beneficial Finance, Hamilton Direct, and HFC Bank itself. And the credit agreements, the terms and conditions state that if you default on your debt, we will charge you reasonable costs. Or there's another form which says we will charge you indemnity costs. Indemnity costs means, we will charge you everything that it costs us to recover the debt. But neither of those apply. It doesn't say we will add 16.4 to your debt. So it's in breach of the agreement in the first place. That doesn't make it illegal, but it's in breach of contract. But what makes it illegal, the first letter that the solicitor sent out is illegal because it's in breach of the solicitor's rules. I mean, when I say to people in breach of the rules, they say, "Oh, well, that's not so serious, is it?" The rules are based on the Solicitors Act 1974. So if you are breaching a statutory instrument, an act, it's illegal by definition. It's against the law. So solicitors are not allowed to write to the other side in litigation claiming costs that they're not entitled to.
Did any of these customers?
Only a court can order the other side to pay costs.
Only a judge can do that?
Yeah.
Did any of the customers who had this 16%, well, it's more than 16%, added to what they owed, did any of them initially raise the alarm, Nicholas, and say, what the hell is going on here?
What happened if they did that, the solicitors just dropped it. What they hoped for was to get most of and it happened, most of the court judgments they got were what's called default judgments. There's no defence, it's not defended, the court just rubber stamps it, and then there's a judgment against you. So, that happened in most cases. But what you need to bear in mind is, and this is very critical, and I had a meeting yesterday with the FCA, and I'll tell you about that later in our discussion, because I was explaining to the FCA exactly how this fraud worked. But what you need to understand is the solicitors, and there were two firms. There was my firm, Waitman's, and another firm called Reston's in Warrington. They paid for all the legal costs and any other expenses like inquiry agents or whatever. So it was in their interest not to issue proceedings, because if they had to pay out 300 quid for a court fee and the debtor really had no money, they would lose it, and it would be a losing game. So they tried not to issue proceedings in as many cases as possible. So the ideal scenario would be obviously somebody pays up straight away, and that did happen, or their preferred method was to put a charge on somebody's property, which is like a mortgage, to turn the debt into a secured debt with the illegal charges added, or accept instalments. But most people, and that's why it's fraud, because if you rely on the ignorance of the other side, or their ignorance of the law, most people, when they receive a solicitor's letter, they're terrified.
Terrified, yeah.
And they're not going to question these charges. Some people were wised up and they did question them. When they questioned them, the charges were dropped.
Let's do a quick recap here, because there's a very serious... so we're going to talk now in a minute about you going to HSBC and saying, you know, what you're doing is absolutely illegal, and this is serious stuff. But I just want to make one point that's really important to make. So we're talking to Mr. Resticle here, Nicholas Wilson. He acted for 20 years for John Lewis Partnership, collecting their debts. It was done fairly. People were treated properly. But HSBC Bank, right, which handled the John Lewis accounts, they bought HFC Bank, made it a subsidiary of HSBC. What's amazing, Nicholas, and of course that's where all these illegal charges start happening. What's really incredible is HFC had previous, and it wasn't an institution in good standing because it was selling dodgy loans in America for a number of years, and I believe, doing the research I did, that they were fined very heftily for that. Tell us about HFC and who they were. Yeah,
one of the biggest fines in American banking history. They did what's called predatory lending. They're a very nasty bank, and HSBC have said, Stephen Green, when he was chair of HSBC, said purchasing HFC was one of the worst decisions they ever made. They've now closed it down in the UK; it no longer exists. But I need to just clarify there were two reasons why the charges were illegal, and the other reason is a bit more technical, so I won't go into it. But it's what's called contingency fees. The solicitors were retaining 16.4% of anything that they recovered from the debtor for their costs. So if they recovered nothing, they didn't get paid. And that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And I told the bank that, and I told the FCA yesterday that it will be a very simple matter for the FCA to investigate this. All they need to do is ask HSBC to send them copies of all the invoices they received from Waitmans and Restons up to 2010 that they paid. And there won't be a single one, because the bank paid nothing in legal charges for debt recovery. And I calculated in the year that I reported Waitmans to the Law Society, in that 1 year alone, £44 million in charges were added onto accounts.
£44 million.
£44 million.
Tell us about the figure of $1 billion before we talk about when you began to raise the alarm about this.
Well, that figure is conservative. Now, I calculated the 44 million. I mean, I've done this by deduction. I did a Freedom of Information Act request to the Ministry of Justice for details of all the numbers of all the claim forms issued by Restons and Waitmans between 2003, which is when I first became involved, and 2010, when they were told to stop doing it by the Office of Fair Trading. And I focused on the year that I reported Waitmans, so that's 2006. And I ignored Restons figures because I know Restons had other clients, but I knew that Waitmans didn't have other clients. So that meant in that year, they issued 2,900 claims through Northampton County Court. It doesn't sound like a lot, but bear in mind, after I reported Waitmans, the Law Society said, yes, it was an illegal contingency fee, but we're not taking any action because it only happened in a small number of cases. Well, taking that 2,900, Waitmans also said in Chambers Directory, which is the legal, the Bible for legal firms, they said, talking about their debt recovery team, they've got this innovative new system of debt recovery, and they only issue proceedings in 20% of cases. So take that 2,900, in fact, round it up to 3,000. So that's 1/5. So that's 15,000 cases where they would have added the charges. And the average charge was £1,500. So that's 22 million. And I know that Restons were also given the same amount of work as Waitmans, because the bank always said to us, apples for apples, we're going to give you the same work and compare your performances. So my estimation is in that year it was 44 million. And now I get and it increased exponentially from that year until 2010 when they were told to stop doing it. So suppose in the 7 years of my involvement, from 2003 to 2010, suppose there might have been 400-500 million added.
Jesus, Nicholas.
But the point is, HFC have been in business in the UK since the 1970s. So we're talking 40 odd years. And I have no reason to doubt that they've been doing this ever since they started trading in the UK, because they're an American company originally. This arrangement is legal in America. You're allowed to do it in America. So they would have brought their contract over and found some bent lawyers in the UK to do the work. And Restons, and I don't know how long Restons have been doing it, but they've certainly been doing it a lot longer than Waitman's. The senior partner at Reston, the owner of Restons, Christopher Reston, lives in a tax haven, Andorra. He had his own flying license, and he used to fly his own private jet to the UK. That's how much money he was making.
Jesus. We're talking, folks, with Nicholas Wilson. Go to nicholaswilson.com. This is Mr. Essigal, 2006. He reported Waitman's to the Law Society. We're talking about, I reckon, one of the biggest frauds in British financial history, and they've gotten away with it. Well, maybe not. He's working very hard on making sure they don't get away with it. What we're talking about is incredible here. We're talking about levying charges on people who owed store card debts using a company they'd acquired called HFC. We're talking about HSBC here, adding on over 16%. It runs into over $1 billion. Nicholas said it's conservative. Tell us about... it's 10 years, Nicholas, you've been trying to...
it's 12 years.
12 years, and you have raised the alarm. I was going to say trying to raise the alarm. You've done that much.
It was actually nearly 13 years. It was 2003 when I told the bank it was illegal, because I was head of department at Waitman's, and I had a meeting at HFC's head office. I knew they had solicitors doing the work. When they took over John Lewis, I was worried I'd lose my client, John Lewis. So I set up a meeting with them, and they said, you can do the work so long as you do it on the same basis as our solicitors' Restons. And I said, well, what is that basis? And they explained how the contract works with the 16.4%. And I said, that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And I said, hasn't that ever been challenged? And their solicitor, Duncan Hamilton, said, well, we were reported to the OFT once, but we got away with it.
Now, tell us about that reporting to the Office of Fair Trading. Tell us about that. Who reported them and why did they get away with it?
Not me, but I
know you didn't, but somebody obviously did. But how did they get away with that?
Well, they didn't get away with it. What happened was, I think the OFT may have started making investigations after I'd started campaigning and trying to get money back for people. But it was a big surprise to me. In November 2010, the Office of Fair Trading made an order telling the bank to stop doing it. But I've since found out, every single aspect of this is utterly shocking. I've since found out that the OFT's investigation, because I found out this I made a complaint against the Financial Conduct Authority to the Complaints Commissioner, and he investigated. And as a result of his investigation, he found that the OFT investigation, they only looked at 4 files. They found 4 cases where people had been ripped off. Now,
they weren't looking very hard then, were they?
Well, there are 500,000 to 600,000 of them. Now, I've since found out that the guy who did the investigation at the OFT now works at HSBC.
Nicholas, that's sickening, that. I tell you what we're going to do, mate. We're going to take a very quick 60-second break. When we come back, we'll do a very quick recap. And we're getting tweets and emails on this. There's a lot to get through. When we come back, we'll have about 20 to 25 minutes, so I won't get in your way. I'm asking most of the questions that are being tweeted to us and emailed anyway. For some people listening to this programme, this is new to them and they can't believe their ears. But folks, I'm telling you, it's happening. Go to nicholaswilson.com. 26 past the hour. Very quick break. Back with more from Nicholas after these.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
And Kim Hutchison follows me directly after this programme. It's 28 minutes past the hour. This is Thursday's Richie Allen Show in association with davidicke.com. We're broadcasting on alternatecurrentradio.com, Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester, and we're on the TuneIn app as well. Not for the purpose of bragging, but because it's important, because the programme is listener funded primarily or in the main. We are the most verified, most listened to independent radio show in Europe, and that's by a country mile. 40,000 listeners listening live every night. Our podcast is number one in news and current affairs on Podomatic, and thousands more get it on iTunes as well. Again, that's thanks to you. Our guest this hour is Nicholas Wilson, Mr. Essigal. Go to nicholaswilson.com. He was acting for John Lewis Partnership, collecting their debts. They were debts owed by people who had store cards. They were doing it fairly. They were doing it properly. They were behaving in an ethical manner. But the accounts were sold by HSBC to HFC Bank, a subsidiary. A bank that became a subsidiary of HSBC. They began adding illegal charges to those debts over 16%. It runs over £1 billion. Despite informing HSBC what they were doing was illegal, and despite the OFT telling them it was illegal, didn't matter. This is unbelievable stuff, folks, but it's going on. Nicholas is back in the room with us now. Where does David Cameron come into this?
He's deeply involved in this. When the OFT order came out in November 2010, the order against the bank telling them to stop doing this was signed on the 17th of November, but not made public. That's the date the OFT signed it. But on the 16th of November, it was announced that Cameron was making Stephen Green, the chair of HSBC, a lord. And then on the 22nd of November, Stephen Green was introduced to the House of Lords, which was his formal induction into the House of Lords, and the Office of Fair Trading released a press release. But the press release was about charging orders, which is a charge on your property, which I was talking about earlier. It's a charge on your the article was about them clamping down on banks using charging orders oppressively to collect debts. You know, if you had a £700 debt, the bank would apply for a charge on your property. It had nothing to do with these collection charges. But right at the bottom of the press release was a PDF attachment. You know, it was a footnote at the bottom of the press release, which contained this order against HFC telling them to stop adding collection charges. The order against HFC has got nothing to do with charging orders. So it was covered up. It was covered up on the day that Stephen Green was being introduced to the House of Lords.
Now, Cameron was the Prime Minister of the coalition government, right?
Yep.
How can you be sure that Cameron knew that Green was part of this massive fraud?
Well, I can't prove it. It's circumstantial.
But
what, you know...
Listen, I can't stand politicians in general. I certainly have no love for the despicable David Cameron and his pals, his Bullingdon club mates. But at the same time, just to be fair to him, because he isn't here, while we might suspect that he would... we don't know, do we?
You know how it works. I mean,
I do. Listen, I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, you know.
He does things at arm's length. And what he would have put word out in the civil service, I'm going to make Stephen Green a lord. Is there any dirt I should have?
Absolutely right, 100%.
The OFT would have said, well, we've got this order we're just about to publish, and he will have said, cover it up.
And it's very plausible, Nicholas. That's very plausible. Yeah.
But it was. Well, let me.
I'm not doubting you. I'm just saying. You know,
this is even more plausible. Last year, before the election, the Sunday Times were investigating this and Cameron's involvement. The journalist Tom Harper of the Sunday Times. He and I worked on it for about a month. During that period, I've since discovered, the associate editor of the Sunday Times, Camilla Cavendish, went to Chequers. The story was spiked, which means it was dropped. The day before publication, I sent Tom, and this is all on my website, I sent Tom an email saying, so is it in? And it was going to be a big spread. He said, no, sorry. And
how has he reacted to that?
Well, wait till I finish this story.
Sorry, Nicholas, go ahead.
As usual with the mainstream media, there was absolutely no explanation. It was just, no, we're not publishing it. No explanation whatsoever. 2 months later, it was announced that Camilla Cavendish had left the Sunday Times and she got a job at number 10 Downing Street.
Oh, yeah. I'm aware of this, of course, because I've been reading your website since last year. I'm aware of it. Our listeners won't know this.
Cameron also appointed an HSBC director to the head of the BBC, Rona Fairhead. The BBC don't report HSBC crimes. In the last year, since she's been head of the BBC don't. There was a £28 million fine in Switzerland. There was a $385 million fine in the States. There was a scandal about mortgages in the States. None of this is reported on the BBC. The head of the BBC is an HSBC director.
BBC is a propaganda wing for the establishment.
Yeah.
You and I both know that.
What's going on? I mean, HSBC have already got the rest of the media covered through advertising. Channel 4 investigated it, then dropped it. The HSBC advertise on Channel 4, but they can't. BBC don't have adverts. So what do? They put an HSBC director in charge of the BBC. They are desperate to keep a lid on this because HSBC will lose its license in America. HSBC is on probation. They've signed a deferred prosecution agreement. They paid $1.9 billion and signed a deferred prosecution agreement promising that they would behave themselves for 5 years. If this comes out, they could easily lose their license in the States. And it was Cameron that got that deferred prosecution agreement. He went and had a meeting. Well, this is according to a whistleblower in the States. He had a meeting with Obama, pleading with him not to prosecute, because they were going to prosecute HSBC over the Mexican drug cartel money and the terrorist money. Cameron pleaded with him not to prosecute them, so they didn't. They entered into this deferred prosecution agreement. So HSBC are on probation. I mean, with all the Panama Papers, there's a lot of talk that they will probably lose their license anyway, because when their whole involvement in all that comes out. I mean, in the news today, it's been announced that there was some tax evasion scam with a film company. In the High Court, it has been ruled illegal. It's an illegal tax evasion scheme. It was set up by HSBC, who were paid £8 million to set it up. Wherever there is fraud and tax evasion anywhere in the world, HSBC is going to be in there.
This is, yeah.
The BBC recently did a report about very wealthy people in China getting their money out of China because of the economic situation there. What they didn't report, and has been reported in Bloomberg, is that people are doing that through HSBC in Hong Kong. I mean, they've got their finger in every single illegal activity that's going on.
Nicholas, people have been murdered for a lot less than what you know. Do you know what I'm getting at? Why weren't you? I mean, we know these corporations hire these former military guys all the time to get rid of people. That's not conspiracy theory. They do it all the time. You're lucky, mate, to be honest, aren't you, to be here?
But this is the reason I've put everything on my website. The reason I'm completely transparent and open is because if they do kill me, I mean, it's pretty obvious why.
Yeah.
Nobody can refute my evidence. It's all there in black and white. There's been an order by the Solicitors Regulation Authority against the solicitors. There's been an order by the Office of Fair Trading against the bank. And after the SRA order against Waitman saying it was illegal, Waitman's carried on doing it.
Tell me this. Oh, I've been criticising him recently a lot. Did you send any of this information to Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I have a friend that knows Jeremy Corbyn. He lives in Islington, and he's in the Labour Party. And I sent an email to Jeremy Corbyn about this 2 years ago. Ed Miliband knows about this. He came to Hastings, and I told him on the street in Hastings about it. Labour know about this. I had a meeting recently. I won't name names because it's still, it's confidential. But I had a meeting with somebody that works in John McDonnell's office recently. I told him all about it. They've done.
You can swear if you want. We're past the watershed. So you're telling me that this lying bastard Corbyn has within his grasp the means to bring down this government, and he won't do it.
he's scared. He's not ready to be Prime Minister. The Labour are not ready to run the country, so they can't touch this.
It's more than that, mate. It's more than that, I think.
The MPs that have helped me is a Tory MP and an SNP MP. Jesse Norman, who's a Tory MP, used to be on the Treasury Select Committee. He grilled the FCA about their cover-up, because the FCA covered this up in collusion with HSBC. And that's been dealt with by the Treasury Select Committee by Jesse Norman. And more recently, Scottish SNP MP George Caravan who now sits on the Treasury Select Committee, he's also been grilling the FCA about this. The only support I've had is from non-Labour MP. Labour ignore me completely.
And yet you are a single question, Nicholas. Let me just say this. It's 21 minutes to the top of the hour. We got into this with Nicholas last year. A lot has happened since then. That's why he's back on. He should have been back a bit sooner. Mea culpa. He's got an open door anyway to come back whenever he wants. Listen to what you're hearing here. You're talking about one of the biggest corruptions ever in the history of this country. And the current establishment, the current government, has got their fingerprints all over it. And what we're learning now is that the leader of the opposition has, within one single question at PMQs, the actual ability to bring the government down, and yet nothing from the Labour Party.
Nothing.
That's not an exaggeration, by the way, Nicholas. A question at PMQs about this would end it. Game over.
Yeah, I've told Corbyn that. I said, if you want to get rid of Cameron, deal with this. They completely ignore me. I've sent emails. I sent email about this to every MP. That is 650 MPs. And some of my followers also sent an email to their constituency MP. Out of all those, my emails and my followers' emails, there were 5 responses, 2 of which were lies.
Jesus.
That is the level of interest in this from somebody please tell me what's going on. It makes me ill, as you can understand.
I don't know how you've kept going all this time.
Well,
fighting it, to be honest.
I'll tell you how I keep going. I'm 59. I've been unemployed for a long time. I constantly lose it in fear of losing my house. I'm constantly fighting repossession proceedings. I can't get a job. I'm unemployable. I would work if I could, but I can't. And because I'm a whistleblower. Who's going to give Edward Snowden a job? It just doesn't happen with whistleblowers. So I keep going because I think if and when this whole thing finally explodes, somebody might give me a job. Or maybe the people who get their money back from HSBC might make me a donation. But it's the only hope I've got of ending my life with any kind of security.
You know what? No matter what I say, it won't sound sincere and it won't mean anything to you anyway. But I've the utmost admiration, Nicholas. I'm going to read a few tweets, mate. Have a sip of water there, and I'll read a few tweets, my friend. Martin Houston says all arch criminals. Corbyn needs to hang his head in shame too. I want to say hi to Tommy B. Thanks, Tommy. It's nice to be back. Huberte says, Richie, all the solicitors work for the Crown Corporation. There is no justice available for the common people. They are all in it together. I'll tell you what, Huberte, it gets worse than that. They're destroying legal aid in this country as well. They want to make absolutely sure that only millionaires have access to solicitors. Wayne was on to say governments, banks, corporations, politicians, they're all the same entity, even if they disagree at some level. Masonic, he says. Martin Oak says Obama, Cameron, etc. are all involved in this conspiracy. Zana in New Zealand is listening to this, saying that the depths of this is mind-boggling. Betsy is also in New Zealand. Susie, we live in a world with education and social systems designed to override instinct. It's designed to make us question our doubts or doubt ourselves. The amount of correspondence on this particular topic, I'm not surprised by it. People are absolutely devastated. People are devastated hearing this because some of our listeners are hearing this for the first time, and they are devastated to know that a financial institution could perpetrate a fraud like that on thousands and thousands of people to the tune of over £1 billion. They could do it maliciously. When challenged by Nicholas Wilson, Mr. Ethical, about what they were doing, they basically shrugged their shoulders. They're being helped escape wider public condemnation for what they did by the media and by this government. who have an awful lot to lose. Go ahead, Nicholas.
And by the security services.
And by the security services.
I'll tell you about the security services. One of the directors of HSBC is Jonathan Evans, who used to be the head of MI5. He's got a very lucrative role now at HSBC. At the time, Rona Fairhead was appointed to the BBC in 2014 by our delightful business secretary, Sajid Javid, who was Secretary for Culture, Media and Sport at the time. That was completely corrupt and unlawful, the appointment of Rona Fairhead. It's all on my website. But at the time she started at the BBC, quietly, Jonathan Evans was made a Lord. He was already a Sir, but he was made a Lord by David Cameron and put into the House of Lords. So we've got an ex-head of MI5, but it gets worse. Last year, Lord Jandrin, who was deputy chairman of HSBC Private Bank, he was appointed to the government's Security and Intelligence Committee, which is a committee of the House of Lords that oversees the work of MI5, MI6, GCHQ and the Ministry of Defence. So we've got an HSBC banker in charge of all those security services. Now, I blogged about that in February this year, and a month later, I've noticed that Lord Jandrin is now no longer a chairman of HSBC, which is very interesting. But that is what is going on. HSBC they've got a director in Serco. They own 3 hospitals through the PFI scam. I mean, they have got their fingers in every single establishment organisation in the UK, and they own the country, and they can do what they like. Look, Cameron Osborne in his most of his recent budgets, he's legislated in favour of HSBC. Cameron was at the EU conference recently negotiating our terms. He ring-fenced the City of London, from EU regulation. He said, we're not in the Eurozone. We are a special case. We don't need to be regulated by the EU. So he protected bankers from regulation from the EU. George Osborne did away with the bank levy, which HSBC complained about. I mean, they basically control the government.
We could list their crimes till we were blue in the face in terms of state assets being sold for pennies on the pound to pay back an illegal debt. We could be here talking about fractional reserve banking till the cows come home. These are arch criminals, Nicholas. Alex Benjamin tweets this. It's a great question. I was going to ask it, Alex, but thanks for preempting it. Did Mr. Essigal send the info to RT Television and Press TV? What about RT, Nicholas? Have they shown any interest?
Well, I'll tell you about RT. I've been on RT. I was on RT last year when the Swiss leaks thing came out. The Hervé Falciani thing.
Yeah.
And they interviewed me on that. But later in the year last year, in the springtime, I can't remember the exact date, they invited me on to talk about this. Now, I think the mistake I make is I tweet things. I say I'm going on RT tomorrow night or something. Anyway, they phoned me up the day before, cancelled it. Again, no explanation whatsoever. They just cancelled it.
That must have been devastating, Nicholas.
It happens to me all the time. I got cut off talk radio last week. It happens to me all the time. It's been spiked by Private Eye, Sunday Times. The Guardian ignore me because they've got huge revenue from HSBC advertising. Channel 4 spiked it. BBC Panorama have looked at it twice. Moneybox, Paul Lewis Moneybox, knows about this inside out. He won't go near it. I mean, it happens to me all the time, Richie. These journalists, they take an interest. And to be fair to the journalists, I think they're genuinely interested. And like you, they understand it's a major scandal. They take it to their bosses and they say, we're not touching that, it's HSBC.
I began my career in the late 90s. And what I saw, just after I'd begun broadcasting and producing programmes, I began to notice the likes of Global and Bauer and other companies buying up chains and chains and chains of radio stations. And that's unfortunately what we have. And I know you know this. Some of our listeners won't know it. We were ranting earlier on in the programme about the behaviour of James O'Brien on LBC radio today. O'Brien is a puppet. O'Brien wouldn't have, if he had an individual thought or a thought of his own, it would die of loneliness. They are programmed by the organisations which own their radio stations.
LBC invited me on, I think it was last year, to talk about the tax thing. And I said, I must warn you that, I can't talk about these things in an abstract sense.
Without mentioning, yeah.
I will talk about Cameron. And they said, oh, well, in that case, we won't have you on. And it just, it happened. And what I think I should do is A, not tweet, and B, not tell these people what I'm going to talk about. So at least I can get on. I mean, I know they'll cut me off as soon as I do start talking. I mean, one of the most interesting things, I must mention this. Yesterday in Parliament, there was a big row. Angus Robertson challenged Cameron about the fact that there were 300 people investigating tax evasion in HMRC, and there are over,
thousands going after people who need money. Yeah,
that was my research from 2 years ago. I tweeted that. I did the research in 2014, in January 20. So whilst yesterday I was in London showing the FCA about the details of the HSBC fraud, Parliament were discussing a tweet I made. I've lost my train of thought, but it was just, all those figures were denied by David Gauke today. There is a government press release dated 2013 from David Gauke saying we have appointed 100 new people to investigate tax evasion, and that adds to our current team of 200. So that's 300, Mr. Gauke. And I also found out today there's a guy on Twitter who follows me. I can't remember his name, so I can't credit him. Sorry. He's had a really good look at the HMRC data about their staff. They have 147 staff investigating offshore tax evasion. 147.
We're just about to run out of time. I'm going to give you the last 60 seconds, right? I want you to tell us, where do you go from here? You've exposed the greatest scandal in modern history in this country, financially aided and abetted by the pillars of the state, the government and the media. What do you do? What more can you do to bring these people to justice?
Well, that's easy to answer because I haven't exposed it. I'm still...
Yeah, you're still trying to, yeah.
And as I said, I had a meeting at the FCA yesterday. It was a positive meeting. They won't tell me anything. They're not allowed to tell me anything about what they're going to do. But there were 4 of them. One guy had flown down from Edinburgh for the meeting. They're taking me seriously, finally. And because it's all... I've put on my website all the evidence that I gave to the FCA yesterday. And I've got a recording of the meeting. So the public will know exactly what the FCA know now about this fraud. If the FCA do nothing, there's a serious, serious problem. So I think they have to do so. I think this year this thing will crack.
Folks, go to nicholaswilson.com. Nicholas, come back on whenever you want. Whenever you've got anything to tell us, mate. You've got an open door. I've said that. My word is absolute gold. You can come on anytime you want. Okay. You're brilliant, mate. You really are. It actually pains me and upsets me to think that you're worried about your house and your bills. It absolutely fucks me off to think about that. It really does, in light of what these people have done. I think there's always, guys like you, mate, regardless of what's happening now, your future is bright, Good things are coming. Well, when you're decent and when you're honest, good things are coming, mate.
Okay.
Look after yourself. Talk to us again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, Nicholas. Nicholas Wilson on the line to us there from his home.